in August, I let you all pick books for me to pre-order and read. Was this a good idea? I pre-ordered 6 based on your recommendations, and I've read 5 so far. I'll let you know which book I haven't read and why at the end. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to grade you all based on how well you met my reading needs. The question is, of course, how to grade you, because I don't do star ratings, so we can't use star ratings. We need some sort of other grading rubric. And here it is. Each book has a chance to receive a total of 3 points. And those 3 points are awarded for 3 different criteria. So the first one is a point goes to whether or not the book surprised me in a good way. The second point is awarded based on whether the book made me want to read more books from that same publisher. And these are of course, are all from independent publishers and small presses, as always on this channel. And the third point is awarded if I, upon finishing the book and closing the cover for a final time, held the book to my chest and said, ugh. So each book has the potential to receive a total of 3 points. That's 3 points each for 5 books, which brings us to a total of 15 points possible. In order to pass this test, you all need to receive 14 out of 15 possible points, which is, of course, an A, because we don't do anything less than an A here. All right, where should we start? Let's start with Cross Stitch by Jazmina Barrera, translated by Christina MacSweeney, and this is published by Two Lines Press. This is the story of 3 friends in Mexico, 3 young women, and it tells the story of their friendship from their teenage years up until adulthood. And you learn, I think almost on the first page, that one of the 3 friends has recently drowned. So this story is narrated by one of these 3 friends, and you learned right away that one of her friends has drowned. The novel jumps across time over and over and over again, back to when these friends first met, forward to a post-high school trip they took to Europe, then back again to high school years, then forward again to when the narrators learned of her friend's death. And then woven throughout are snippets from the narrator's recent book that she has just published about the history of embroidery. So you get facts about embroidery, interesting snippets about its political and artistic history, all just woven throughout the novel, which really is not at all a plot-driven novel. It's definitely driving towards one final moment at the end, but plot is not the focus here, I would say. This book is also very, very much about literature. There's just constant mention of books and authors throughout the book, and two of the friends in particular are study literature, and the narrator is fascinated with English literature, and one of the other friends is more taken with Latin American literature, and there's just constant references to literature throughout the book. So, points. Did this surprise me? Yes. And I need to explain a little bit of the book in order to share how this surprised me. So, this is a novel about 3 friends, but almost always in the book, 2 of the friends are at the forefront and 1 friend is in the background. So maybe they are taking a trip to a museum. 2 of the friends go off together to look at one kind of artwork, and the third goes somewhere else because they want to see something else. Or there's a point where 2 of the friends are in London and the third chooses not to join them in London and stays in Paris, and then they meet up later in Paris. There are times when they're younger where 2 of them are closer and the third is kind of on the periphery. So always, almost always, it's 2 together, 1 in the background. But what that makes that particularly poignant is, if you know anything about cross stitch, a cross stitch, like the classic stitch in cross stitch, looks like a cross. It's an X on the front of the fabric. So that's 2 stitches to make an X. But in order to make the cross stitch, the X on the fabric, you don't just need the 2 stitches, you need a 3rd stitch. But the 3rd stitch isn't visible from the front. The 3rd stitch is on the back because you need to take the needle up and over and then back and back, and then over on the back of the fabric, and then through the fabric and down. It's very hard to do with my fingers rather than with fabric, but in order to make the cross stitch of cross stitch, you need 3 stitches, but only 2 are visible from the front. I was thinking, oh, it's so strange. There's always only 2 of them together, and the third is doing something else, or is in the background, or is, overseas or whatever. And then I realized, well, wait a minute. For a cross stitch, you need 2 in the front and 1 in the background, and that becomes even more poignant when the third friend passes away and you have the 2 being held together as friends with the memory of their friend who's died always in the back of their minds and in the background. And then also the way time is handled in the novel, you're moving forward and then back, and then forward and then back, and then forward and then back. That is how you move through embroidery or cross stitch. You move forward, and then on the back you need to move back and forward and back and forward and back, or then if you reach the end of a row of stitches, then you have to go move back. It just evokes the actual physical movement of cross stitch within the novel cross stitch. And I love that so much when the form of a novel is able to evoke something from a theme within the novel. It's just so cool to me. So that very much surprised me, and I loved that about this novel. Will this book inspire me to read more from Two Lines Press? 100% yes. I actually have a stack of books from Two Lines Press that are waiting on my shelf right now to be read, but they also have a couple of books upcoming that sound amazing as well. They have amazing sales. Like, they had a great sale for Women in Translation Month, so check it out. Sign up for their newsletter. They always have great sales going on. So 2 books that are coming out soon that sounded really interesting. Through the Night Like a Snake, which is an anthology of Latin American horror stories. And then Off-White, which is a novel by Astrid Romer, which is translated from the Dutch, and it's set in 1966 Suriname. And this is from the author of On a Woman's Madness, which was a finalist for the National Book Award for Translated Literature. And did this make me hold the book to my chest and say, at the end, yes, for sure. This was the book that made me realize that could be a category of points, because I realized that I had done that for several of these books. And really, for this one, it was the final image at the end of the book that was really beautiful. The final scene was very beautiful. And so upon closing the book, I absolutely said, Next up, we have The Possessed by Witold Gombrowicz, and this is translated from the Polish by Antonia Lloyd-Jones and published by FitzGaldo Editions. This is also coming out in the US, so FitzCarraldo is a UK publisher, and this is coming out from the US from Grove Press in March 2024. So if you're in the US and are looking for a copy of this, you can get one coming up soon. Of course, FitzGaldo does ship to the US as well. This follows several different characters, actually, but including a tennis instructor who travels to the Polish countryside, a young, handsome tennis instructor who travels to the Polish countryside to be the instructor for a young woman of a Polish bourgeois household. They fall into what is kind of a twisted love affair and then get tied up in the supernatural happenings of a nearby castle, which is home to a mad prince. There is, featured within this novel prominently, is a haunted hand towel. There's a great introduction in this novel that really puts it in context with the rest of Gombrowicz's work. So Gombrowicz was a celebrated Polish writer and playwright. He was a modernist writer who was nominated several times for the Nobel Prize. He lived much of his adult life in Argentina, where he was stranded from World War II all the way up until 1963 or something like that. And then he did not receive acclaim for his work until pretty much the end of his life. He has several novels, but his diaries in particular, I have read, are considered a philosophical masterpiece. But this novel is a potboiler. This is goofy and pulpy and ridiculous and a lot of fun. He published it in serial form, actually, right before World War II under a pseudonym, and later was even reluctant to acknowledge it among his among his oeuvre. But the introduction claims that its playfulness is actually part of its brilliance. And I'm going to read a quote from the introduction here. So it says, "But the shamefulness, the pulp, and the schlock is also the mark of its genuine avant-garde originality. A novelist who's too precious about the creation of a style is not a true novelist because they are not a true person. They are just another ghost of unreality." Did it surprise me? Yes, absolutely. It surprised me because it was so funny and ridiculous and also really charming. And then I was surprised. I wasn't super familiar with the work of Gombrowicz, and after reading it, I went back to the introduction. It was just very surprising to learn more about the rest of his work. Will I seek out more work published by this publisher? Yes. FitzGaldo Editions is a fantastic publisher, and there is so much that I want to read from them that I'm not even going to list any because it's everything. Did I say... Not exactly. So I laughed at the end because the end is kind of goofy too. I closed it and immediately told my husband about this goofy ending, and he was like, "Oh, so you didn't like the book?" And I said, "No, the ending was perfect for what the book was." So it was great. Because of that, because I did have an immediate reaction to the ending, it's getting half a point. So 2.5 points total. Next up is Peach Pit, which is edited by Molly Llewellyn and Kristel Buckley, and this is published by Dzanc books. And these are 16 stories of unsavory women. This is an anthology of short stories. They're really good. These stories are intense. Most of them are about women who are pushed to the brink to do wild, often violent things. These are about love affairs, mother and daughter relationships, sibling relationships, robot relationships, serial killer relationships. There is murder, there is sex, there is lots and lots of revenge. These stories range in genre from horror to science fiction to thriller to realistic fiction, fantastical fiction. There's a huge range. There's even a story in here that reads more like poetry. The editor's note in particular is really interesting. So they write a lot about women who in literature don't fall into the traditional tropes. Doesn't fall into the trope of the virgin, the whore, the mother, the old maid, the women who fall into the gray areas that are outside those labels, and how women who fall into the gray area are often invisible. They're not represented in literature. And they write, "There is no term given for a woman in the middle, therefore no room for a woman to exist outside of these definitions. A woman who doesn't fit these classifications doesn't exist." Nowhere is this more apparent than with the women found in the margins of society. Trans women and women of color for far too long have had to squeeze into the tiny space made for them. So often in literature, these women are only heard when the topic is something they can uniquely understand. They are brought into the conversation to talk about the trauma and tragedy that their identity and history has contributed to, but their joy, love, fears, and anxieties are ignored if it is not tied to their difference. Fantastic collection of stories. Was I surprised? Absolutely. There were so many stories in here that surprised me. Not every story surprised me. Some of them surprised me one surprised me in a little bit of a disappointing way. But the vast majority had awesome surprises throughout. I was really surprised and taken by the variety of subjects and styles. These are so haunting and weird, and I love that as well. Another thing that surprised me about this collection was that I was so excited to pick it up and read it. A lot of times with short story collections, though I love them, it takes a little oomph to get me to pick it up and start a new story over. Once I've finished one story, set the book down, sometimes you got to really encourage yourself and say, no, you're going to like it. Pick it up. this I was excited to pick up every single day, and I flew through it. Will I pick up more from this publisher? Absolutely. There are a ton of really interesting authors that they publish, including some early work of Stephen Graham Jones, so check that out. But they have a book they're publishing in 2024 called Dzanc by Susie Edeshamzadeh, and these are stories about contemporary Iranian women set in both the Islamic Republic and in the United States, and that's coming out in June 2024. So that's 2 points. All right, the third point, did I do this and say at the end? Yes. Lauren Graff's story is the final, and it's because Lauren Graff's story called Amaranth was the final story. If it had been maybe one of the other stories, maybe not, but that story had the most perfect moment of revenge at the end that, yes, I definitely treasured this book for a moment. Next up, we have Landscapes by Christine Lay, and this is published by $2 Radio. And this is the story of, I guess she's an art historian who lives on a country estate in the UK in a near future time of climate collapse. And her partner is the owner of this estate. And the house itself has become a refuge for climate refugees. That's how they're using it. And the house is crumbling. It's falling apart around them because they've experienced extreme flooding. I think like a period of several years of extreme flooding followed by extreme drought. So nothing on the land is surviving around them. The house is crumbling down around them, and the narrator and her partner have decided to finally sell the house, and it's set to be demolished. And she is attempting to catalog whatever she can of the house's massive library and art collection. And then haunting her in the background is a memory of an assault that she was the victim of many years before. And so there's a lot going on. It's mostly told through like diary entries, and it is just filled with really detailed descriptions of the artwork and of pieces of art throughout history as well. So much of this is descriptions of art. And so what it becomes is a story of preservation through art and then preservation of art. So there's a lot in here about how, and her father was a botanist, so he talks a lot about preserving plants, like plant specimens, through illustrations. There's a quote somewhere in here about, maybe I even have it. Her father says that to illustrate is to preserve. So things that are disappearing around you, things that are ephemeral, things that aren't going to last forever, if you depict them in art, that is to preserve them for the future, for future generations. But then what happens when the art itself starts to disintegrate? What happens when the art starts to disappear or decompose or whatever it is? The art doesn't last forever either. And so that's so much of what this book is about, and it's just beautiful. Was I surprised with this book? Yes, absolutely. In particular, the way the climate collapse is depicted felt so real. It wasn't like post-apocalyptic, everybody out for themselves type of thing. This felt like this is what this could actually look like in the future. And it was the focus of the story, but also not really the focus of the story. So that's what it felt like, people's stories and their own personal dramas and the questions of art, will still be going on in the time of climate collapse. It felt like seeing into the future. And then there was a point of view change in the book that really surprised me, because it was a point of view that I didn't expect to get. And I think a point of view that maybe it just is unexpected. And I won't share what that is, but that also very much surprised me in this novel. Will I seek out more books from $2 Radio? Yes, I love $2 Radio. They have a book that came out in November that is particularly intriguing to me, a collection of stories called Other Minds and Other Stories by Bennett Sims. It sounds really good and weird and just great. Did I hold this book to my chest and say, at the end. This was the first book I read of these, so I don't actually remember for sure, but I don't think I actually did do that. And that's kind of what I do when I finish a book that is like, the ending just pulls it all together, and it's amazing. I don't think I did that at the end of this book, which doesn't mean that I didn't really enjoy this book. The ending just wasn't one of those endings. I think the ending was perfect for what this book is, but I didn't do the thing at the end of this book. However, there is a really, really, really cool section after the novel is over. After all is said and done, there's notes of resources for all the artwork mentioned, but then also a section where she writes, in addition to the sources listed above, I am indebted to the following books, which have been foundational to my thinking and writing. And then is this huge paragraph of all these amazing books, some of which I've heard of, some of which I haven't heard of, but all of which are now books I want to read. So when I saw that was the yes moment. So I'm giving it half a point. This next book better be perfect score. Can't lose any more points. And finally, of the 5 books, The New Animals by Pip Adam, and this is published in the US by Dorothy, a publishing project. This novel is set in Auckland, New Zealand, in what I'm pretty sure just covers a 24-hour period of time, but with lots of flashbacks in between. And the novel is a very tight focus on a small group of characters who are all in some way involved in a last-minute fashion photo shoot. You weave in and out of the perspectives of different characters who are involved in some way with this photo shoot. So you have the hairstylist, the makeup artist, like one of the designers or seamstresses. It's kind of unclear exactly what her role is, but she's integral to the actual clothing itself. Then you have the owners of the fashion label as well, one of a close friend of the group. So all of these different perspectives as they all try to frantically prepare for this photo shoot that's happening the next day. So it is a zoomed in look at this group of people in an intense and very specific situation, and then also an exploration of all the outside baggage all of them are bringing into this situation. A lot of it is fairly stream of consciousness. It's sometimes it was hard to follow exactly what the characters were thinking. However, I was like so completely riveted to each of the characters' stories, especially the hairstylist who is in kind of an intense situation with a dog. I was riveted to this story and so desperately wanted to know how the photo shoot was going to go at the end. There are so many amazing themes explored in this book, including class difference, generational difference, aging, climate change, New Zealand's place on a global stage, mental health, sexuality, communication and miscommunication, power dynamics, just so much going on here. So was I surprised? Point number 1. Was I surprised? Yes. So like I said, I was riveted, even though I didn't always know what was going on. I was invested in this photo shoot. And then the ending happened. Not even the ending, like the last third of the book is such a sea change. It is so different, so wild. This ending is not going to be everyone's cup of tea. There were moments when I didn't think it was going to be my cup of tea. It is basically one very extended scene at the end, and I lost a little bit of patience at moments, but knew somehow deep within my soul that it was going to pay off, that it was going to be worth it. And then the final few pages hit, and oh my God, just mind blown. This was everything. This is what I want a book to do for me. I want to question what I just read. I want to say, did I enjoy that experience? And just even asking that question is like enjoyment for me. Fair warning, did it make me want to pick up more books from this publisher? 100% yes. Dorothy Project is just so very cool. They only publish 2 books a year. They come out at the same time in October, and there are many, many, many books on their backlist that I am so interested in, including the works of Renee Gladman. They also have published several books from Amina Kane, including recently, just maybe the past 2 years, A Horse at Night on Writing. That brings us to our final point. Here it is. Did this earn you all the final point? Did I hold this to my chest upon finishing it and say, I think you can probably guess what, yes. I mean, it was more like, so that's a total of 3 points, which means you passed 14 out of 15 points. Did you ever doubt that you would get an A? Of course you were going to get an A. So what didn't I read? I did not read The Understory by Saneh Sangsuk, and this was translated from Thai by Poopoksakul, and this was published, or is going to be published, by Vellum. And the reason I haven't read it yet is because I think the publishing date got pushed back. So originally, when I looked it up on Vellum's website, it had a publish, like a date, a release date in the fall, and I've since checked after pre-ordering it, and I think it's coming out in the spring now, which happens. Publishing dates can get moved. It's not that I didn't want to read it. It's not that I didn't try to read it. I did order it, and it's on its way. So The Understory is the story of a monk in his 90s in a village in Thailand who every night tells the children of the town stories and adventures from his youth. And so it's a novel about storytelling. But unbeknownst to you all, there were actually 2 other books from that pre-orders video that I was super interested in that didn't quite win your vote. There were people who voted for both of these, but they didn't quite get the numbers to win, to be in the top 6. So one of them was The Long Form by Kate Briggs. That's the second book that Dorothy Project published this year. I just think it'll be a cool thing to do, to read both of the books that Dorothy put out in 2023. So I actually have that book. I didn't bring it over here with me. And then also from Hub City Press is a short story collection called Good Women by Hallie Hill. And these are 12 short stories of Black women in Appalachia. And that collection got so many good reviews and such great press that it really piqued my interest as well. And I got it from the library, so I had it, and I read the first story in it and then ran out of time and somebody else was in line for it. So I had to give it back to the library, but I hope to read it sometime in the near future. All points and grading aside, I loved doing this. I loved hearing from you what books you were interested in and then picking those up myself. They were, of course, all 5 amazing books that I loved. If you like hearing about books that are a little bit under the radar, I hope you'll join me next time, because in my next video I'll be sharing my favorite reads from 2023. So I'll see you then. In the meantime, my name is Sarah. It always has been Sarah. Probably always will be Sarah. My name is Sarah. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so grateful for all of you. I will talk to you next time. Bye. That was dumb. It was great.